The sun was setting slow that evening, the way it only does on the plains, like a golden coin sinking into the earth, melting behind the far-off ridges. Dust floated through the air in thin, lazy ribbons, turning every breath into a memory of summer long gone. The world felt old and tired, yet beautiful in its weariness. In the heart of that stillness stood a small farmhouse, leaning slightly east as if bowing to the wind. The paint had peeled off years ago, the fence was missing rails, and the roof whistled when the wind got lonely. Inside lived Clara May Whitlock, a young woman with hands made for kindness and eyes made for sorrow. She was no stranger to hardship. Her mother had passed the winter she turned 16, and her father followed not long after, taken by fever and debt. Folks in town said Clara had been left with nothing, no family, no fortune, no future. But they were wrong. She had something rarer. She had grace. Every morning she rose before dawn, stoking the fire, milking the old cow, and mending what could be mended, a life stitched together from scraps of faith. Her only companions were a gray mare named Daisy and the whisper of wind that came through the cracks in the wall like an old hymn. She worked for coins when she could, sewing torn shirts for the railroad men, patching the skirts of widows who could barely pay her in bread. But she never complained. Clara had the kind of quiet that made people feel seen, even if no one ever saw her. That evening, the air held the smell of rain, sharp and restless. She stood on the porch with a bucket of water, her eyes drifting across the horizon. The sky was bruising purple, clouds rolling in low and mean. The wind picked up, brushing her hair across her cheek like a lover's ghost. She whispered to herself, "Looks like another long night, Daisy." The horse answered with a soft snort, her tail flicking. Clara stepped inside, latching the door against the coming storm. The house felt smaller when the weather turned, the lantern light trembling, the kettle humming a lonely tune. She ladled soup into a single bowl and sat at the table, her hands wrapped around the warmth as thunder began to mutter beyond the hills. And then a sound, distant at first like a heartbeat in the rain. Hoofbeats. Clara froze. No one came this far out unless they were lost or desperate. She set down her spoon, listening as the rhythm grew louder. 2 horses, maybe 3, stumbling through mud and darkness. The knock that followed wasn't polite. It was urgent, ragged. Clara hesitated, heart fluttering. But kindness was her only weapon, and she'd never learned to turn away. She unlatched the door, the wind rushing in like a wild animal. Framed in the stormlight stood a man and a boy, soaked to the bone, shivering, mud streaked across their boots. The man's hat dripped water down his coat, his jaw shadowed with travel dust. The boy, maybe 8 or 9, clung to his father's arm, his eyes wide as the prairie sky. Clara lifted her lantern, its light trembling over their faces. The man spoke first, his voice deep but frayed with exhaustion. "Ma'am, forgive us. We were riding from the north and got caught in the storm. Didn't mean to intrude, just needed a roof for the night if you got one." Clara looked past him. 2 horses stood in the yard, steam rising from their backs. The rain had turned to needles, hard and cold. "You'll catch your death standing there," she said softly. "Come in before the fire dies." They stepped inside, dripping puddles on her wooden floor. She handed the boy a towel and pulled an extra chair closer to the hearth. "Name's Elijah," the man said after a moment, removing his hat. "This here's my boy, Ben." Clara nodded, stirring the fire back to life. "Clara May Whitlock," she replied. "Soup's thin, but it's warm." They ate quietly, the storm whispering against the windows. Ben smiled after a few spoonfuls, the color returning to his cheeks. "It's the best soup I ever had," he murmured, and Clara's heart caught at her throat at the innocence in his voice. Elijah glanced at her, perhaps expecting her to blush, but she only smiled faintly, eyes on the fire. "You've been traveling far?" she asked. "Far enough," he answered. His tone carried something unspoken, weight, loss, perhaps regret. Clara didn't pry. She'd learned long ago that some wounds only heal in silence. The hours passed in quiet company. Elijah dried their coats by the fire, while Ben dozed on a folded blanket, his small hand clutching a wooden toy horse. The flicker of light carved soft gold into the man's features, the kind of face shaped by both storms and gentleness. Clara sat across from him, sewing a tear in a shirt. The rhythm of needle and thread filled the silence. After a while, Elijah said, "You live out here alone?" "Ain't much of a life, but it's mine," she said simply. "I keep the land as best I can. Folks in town don't come by much." He nodded, studying her. "Takes courage living this way." She smiled without looking up. "Takes need more than courage." A soft laugh escaped him, the first sign of warmth. Outside, thunder rolled again, but gentler now, like the sky was sighing itself to sleep. Hours later, when the fire had burned low and the rain became a steady whisper, Clara laid out extra quilts near the hearth. "You and the boy can sleep here. The floor is hard, but it's dry." Elijah looked at her, the flicker of the fire catching something almost tender in his eyes. "You sure? Wouldn't be much of a Christian woman if I turned you out, mister." He hesitated, as if words crowded his throat and couldn't find their way out. Finally, he just nodded. "Thank you, Miss Whitlock." She retreated to her small bedroom, though she didn't sleep. The sound of their breathing filled the house, a rhythm so unfamiliar, yet comforting. When she finally rose before dawn, pale light seeping through the cracks, she found Ben curled beneath a blanket, his face peaceful, his toy horse clutched tight. Elijah sat nearby, still awake, his eyes watching the dying fire. Clara moved quietly, setting water to boil. "You didn't sleep." He shook his head. "Been a long time since I felt safe enough to." She didn't ask why. Some truths don't belong to the morning. Outside, the storm had passed. The earth steamed softly in the sunrise, puddles catching light like spilled silver. Clara stepped onto the porch, breathing in the clean scent of wet soil. Behind her, Elijah's voice came low, almost thoughtful. "Funny thing, Miss Whitlock, you offer a stranger a roof for one night, and he might just remember it for the rest of his days." She turned, smiling faintly. "Then I reckon this night was worth the trouble." He looked at her a long moment, then tipped his hat, as if to seal something silent between them. As the sun lifted over the prairie, painting gold over the broken fence and tired roof, Clara thought to herself, sometimes the Lord sends strangers not to test our kindness, but to remind us we still have it. And for the first time in a long while, she felt the world was listening. Morning came soft and silver, like God had brushed new paint across the horizon. The storm had passed, leaving behind the clean scent of wet earth and the hush that follows hardship. The world, for once, seemed to be breathing easy. Clara May stepped out into the yard barefoot, the mud cool beneath her feet. The prairie stretched endless in every direction, gold where the sun kissed it, mist where it still slept. Her house stood small and humble in the middle of it all, a worn prayer in the wide emptiness. Inside, she could hear the boy laughing. That sound alone felt like grace. Ben sat at her table, legs swinging, a smear of jam across his cheek. The boy's laughter had a kind of purity to it. It softened the edges of the room, warmed the air, made the old clock on the wall sound less lonely. Elijah stood by the doorway, hat in hand, eyes following her movements as she poured coffee into a tin cup. He looked different in the morning light, still rough around the edges, but less shadowed. Clara noticed, though she didn't let her gaze linger. She handed him the cup. "Ain't much, but it's strong." He nodded, taking a sip, wincing at the heat. "Stronger than what I'm used to." "Good," she said softly, turning back to the stove. Sometimes we all need waking up proper. There was something unspoken between them, a quiet respect, maybe curiosity, the start of something unnamed. But Clara didn't chase feelings. She let them arrive like seasons in their own time. Outside, Ben helped her feed the chickens. His laughter rose with the morning wind. Elijah watched from the porch, his face unreadable, though his eyes softened each time she bent to speak kindly to his boy. The land was coming alive again, the sun touching every wet leaf, the creek whispering past the ridge. And in that hush, a strange peace settled, as if the world itself had paused to listen. Later that day, while Clara hung linens in the yard, Elijah led his horse to the trough. The animal was a fine beast, tall, chestnut, muscles like braided steel. Too fine for a man who claimed to be passing through. Clara's eyes lingered on the saddle, polished and embossed with initials she didn't recognize, ER. When Elijah caught her glance, he looked almost sheepish. Bought it off a man who didn't need it no more. She smiled faintly. Must have been a generous man. Or foolish. He returned her smile, the kind that carried more sorrow than joy. There was again that weight in his voice, the ghost of something lost. But Clara didn't pry. She just nodded, letting the silence say what words couldn't. By midday, the sun had turned harsh, and Clara invited them inside to rest. She sliced what bread she had left and poured cold milk for Ben. The boys spoke about their travels, of the rivers they'd crossed, the small towns where no one stayed kind for long. Pa says we're heading west again soon, he said between bites. Gonna find a place where things grow easy. Clara smiled sadly. Ain't no such place, sweetheart. Things don't grow easy anywhere. You just learn how to tend 'em right. Elijah looked at her then, long and quiet. Something in her words seemed to strike him deeper than he cared to admit. After lunch, he offered to chop wood in repayment for her kindness. She tried to refuse, but he insisted. So she sat on the porch, sewing while he worked. Each strike of the axe sounded steady and sure. The sweat on his brow caught the light, his shoulders moving with purpose. It had been a long time since another heartbeat had shared her land, and longer still since that presence felt safe. Ben played nearby with Daisy, the old mare. He brushed her mane and talked to her like she could understand every word. And maybe in her own way, she did. As the sun began to fall, the sky turned soft again, a wash of peach and lilac. They sat together outside, supper done, the air heavy with crickets and distant coyotes. Clara brought out her old fiddle, the one her father used to play before the fever took him. She hesitated before touching the strings, fingers trembling like the memory was too delicate. Ben's eyes widened. You play? Used to, she said. Don't know if my hands remember how. She drew the bow gently. The first note cracked like dry wood, but the next sang sweet and low, drifting out over the land. It wasn't a song for dancing. It was a song for remembering. For all the people who had come and gone. For all the nights she'd kept herself company with prayer and silence. Elijah closed his eyes, the tune curling around him like smoke. When it ended, he said softly, "That's the kind of music a man don't forget." Clara smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "It's just an old tune. Old things hold the most truth," he murmured. They didn't talk much after that. Words would have broken the spell. Later, when Ben was asleep and the stars came out, wide and endless, Elijah stood by the porch rail, staring into the distance. Clara joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. The night smelled of wet grass and pine. "You ever miss a place you ain't seen in years?" he asked quietly. "Every day," she replied. "Sometimes I think I dream more of the past than I live in the present." He nodded, his gaze still far away. "Used to have a ranch not too far from here. Big spread. Folks working under me. Thought I had everything that mattered." Clara looked at him, her voice gentle. "And now?" He took a deep breath, eyes glinting in the starlight. "Now I reckon I'm trying to remember what matters at all." Silence again, but not empty. It hummed with something warm, something that felt almost like understanding. Clara said softly, "You're welcome to stay another night. The road'll be mud till morning anyway." He hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." Inside, Ben slept curled up on a blanket by the hearth, his small chest rising and falling in the firelight. Clara draped another quilt over him, her hand lingering for a moment on his hair. Elijah watched from the doorway, quiet as a shadow. There was a softness in his eyes now, one that hadn't been there when he first arrived. He said lowly, "He hasn't laughed like that in months." Clara looked up. "He's a good boy. You've done right by him." Elijah's voice faltered. "I've done what I could." There was more behind those words, something painful, but he swallowed it down. Instead, he reached into his coat, and pulled out a gold pocket watch, its surface catching the flicker of the flame. It gleamed too fine for a drifter's possession. Clara noticed, but pretended not to. Some truths announce themselves before they're spoken. He turned the watch over in his hand, thumb brushing against the engraving. The initials, ER, glimmered faintly. He whispered more to himself than to her. Tomorrow, I'll tell her. But Clara had already gone to her room, leaving him with the fire and his secrets. That night, she dreamed of voices and sunlight, laughter spilling across the fields, a man's hand brushing hers as they walked by the river. The kind of dream that felt like memory, though it wasn't. When she woke, the morning was pale and cool. The house was still, too still. She rose quickly, heart uneasy, and stepped into the main room. The quilts were folded neatly. The fire was cold, the chairs empty. On the table lay a small, folded note. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The writing was steady, masculine. Thank you for your kindness. You've given my boy more peace than gold ever could. ER. Clara stood there for a long moment, the note fluttering in her hand like a bird trying to fly. Outside, the prairie was silent. Only the wind moved, soft, steady, carrying away the last of the night's warmth. She whispered to the empty room, "Then I reckon the wind changed for good last night." And for the first time in years, she felt both full and hollow, as if she'd given away a piece of her heart and wasn't sure she'd ever get it back. Days passed like dust on the wind, one after another, quiet and colorless, until time itself began to hum the same low tune. Clara May woke each morning to the sound of emptiness. No laughter, no voice, no footsteps. Only the soft creak of wood and the whisper of prairie grass leaning toward the wind. The note still lay folded in her apron pocket, worn now, corners softened by touch. She read it sometimes before bed, though she told herself she didn't care to. The storm had come and gone, yet something of it lingered inside her. The kind of still ache that feels almost holy, like pain stitched to gratitude. She went about her days as before, mending shirts, tending Daisy, lighting her lamp when the sun went down. But each evening, when the wind changed, she found herself stepping out onto the porch, eyes searching the horizon for a man and his boy who'd promised nothing and yet had taken everything with them when they left. The wind never answered. It only carried the smell of sage and smoke and memory. 2 weeks later, the town of Sage Hollow stirred like a waking animal. The streets buzzed with talk, horses lined up outside the saloon, women in bonnets clutching baskets and gossip alike. Clara came into town that morning to sell a few mended coats and buy sugar. She didn't care much for chatter, but she couldn't help overhearing the excited murmur. A man at the general store leaned toward another, whispering loud enough for the world to hear. "He's back," they say. Elijah Reed, owner of Reed Ranch. Been gone near half a year. Word is, he came riding in last night with his boy. Must have been off hiding his fortune or his grief. Clara's breath caught like a thread snagged on a nail. Elijah Reed. The name hit her chest like thunder rolling down a mountain. She turned slow, her mind piecing together every quiet glance, every careful word, every shadow in his voice. The fine horse, the polished saddle, the gold watch. Not a drifter, not a lost man, a millionaire. Her hands trembled as she paid for her sugar. The shopkeeper, a kind old woman, noticed her pallor. "You all right, Miss Whitlock?" Clara nodded faintly. "Just need some air." She stepped outside into the sun, the world spinning soft around her. That evening, back at her farmhouse, she sat at the table staring at the note again. The letters looked different now, sharper, prouder, like a signature meant to be remembered. Elijah Reed, the man who had sat at her fire pretending to be poor. The man who had watched her kindness without a word. The man who'd left before dawn, leaving behind only gratitude and silence. She wasn't angry, not at first. She was something worse. She was small. All her life, Clara had known what it felt like to be overlooked, underestimated, forgotten. But she had thought, foolishly, maybe, that in those few quiet nights she had been seen. She pressed the note to her chest, whispering into the empty room. "You could have told me, Elijah Reed. You could have trusted me." The wind outside rustled the window, soft as apology. A week later, she found herself on the road without quite meaning to be. The path to Reed Ranch wound through golden fields and open sky, a world that seemed to belong to him, and now, by some strange ache to her too. By the time the gates came into view, dusk was falling, that soft hour when everything looks touched by grace. The ranch was vast, alive with sound, horses snorting, dogs barking, men calling to one another across the yard. And there, near the stables, she saw him. Elijah. He stood taller than she remembered, though maybe it was just the wealth of the place around him. The fences white and straight, the barn doors painted clean, the kind of abundance that made her old house seem like a forgotten prayer. Ben was beside him, holding his father's hand, pointing at something in the distance. For a moment, Clara thought of turning back, but the wind shifted, and with it her heart. She stepped forward. Elijah saw her first. He froze, then handed Ben's reins to a stable hand and walked toward her, his face unreadable, though his eyes, those eyes, held something raw and real. Clara, her name on his tongue, felt like a confession. She met his gaze, steady though her voice trembled. Didn't figure I'd see you again, Mr. Reed. He flinched at the title. I didn't mean to lie. I just needed to be no one for a while. And you thought the easiest place to be no one was under someone else's roof? She said softly. The words weren't cruel, but they carried weight, the kind that settles into silence. Elijah took a slow breath. I lost my wife last spring. Everything I had, the land, the money, the men who call me boss, none of it meant anything after that. Ben stopped laughing. I couldn't sleep, so I wrote. His voice cracked, honest and unpolished. I didn't want to be the man with the fortune anymore. I wanted to remember what it was to earn kindness, not buy it. Clara's eyes glistened, though she blinked it away. And you found it, but you left before I could know who I'd given it to. He nodded, shame low in his throat. I was afraid. Afraid you'd look at me different if you knew. Maybe I would have, she said quietly. Or maybe I wouldn't. But you never gave me the chance to decide. The air between them felt fragile, heavy with words that could either break or heal. Then, from the barn, Ben's laughter broke through, pure and bright. The same laughter that had filled her house. Elijah turned, watching his boy chase a dog across the yard, and something in his face softened. He looked back at Clara. He still talks about you, you know, the lady with the kind hands. He keeps asking when we'll go back. Her lips trembled into a smile she didn't expect. Does he now? Every night. The quiet that followed was full of memory, soup simmering, a fiddle tune drifting, the storm easing into morning. Elijah stepped closer. I meant what I wrote, Clara. You gave us peace. You reminded me that goodness still lives out there, not in gold or land, but in people like you. She searched his face, seeing no pride there now, no arrogance. Only gratitude and the faintest flicker of hope. You don't owe me thanks, Elijah. I only did what anyone with a roof should have done. No, he said softly. You did what no one else did. You saw us. You gave us a home, even for one night. His words found the part of her heart she'd long buried, the part that still believed kindness could matter. Ben came running then, his cheeks red with laughter. Miss Clara, you came. She knelt to meet him, her smile breaking through the weight she carried. I couldn't stay away forever, could I? He threw his arms around her, and in that embrace, all the distance between their worlds vanished. Elijah watched them, something tender flickering across his expression, something like peace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the three of them stood there in the soft orange light. Elijah spoke again, his voice low. There's a supper tomorrow for the ranch hands and their families. Ben be mighty pleased if you came. Clara hesitated, her heart a pendulum swinging between pride and longing. Finally, she said, all right, but I'll bring pie. Seems unfair to show up empty-handed. He smiled, truly smiled for the first time since she'd met him. Then it'll be the best supper we've had in years. That night, back in her little farmhouse, Clara lit a candle and sat by the window. The flame flickered against the glass, soft and uncertain, like her heart. She thought of Elijah Reed, The man who had come to her doorstep as a stranger, left as a ghost, and returned as truth. And she thought of herself, still poor, still alone, yet no longer invisible. Because somewhere beyond the ridge, a man and his son were thinking of her too. She whispered into the night, "Sometimes it ain't the rich who change the poor. It's the poor who remind the rich how to be human." And in that moment, beneath the vast Wild West sky, she felt the wind shift again. Not stormy this time, but full of promise. Morning broke golden and kind over the Reed Ranch, the kind of light that made even fences shine. The air carried the scent of hay and distant rain, the laughter of ranch hands calling to their horses. Life moved with purpose there, steady as a heartbeat. Clara rode up slow, Daisy's hooves crunching on the gravel road. Her heart felt restless, but hopeful, the way the world feels before something new begins. She wore her best dress, patched at the hem, but clean, her hair braided neat. Across her lap sat a small basket, the pie she'd promised, warm beneath a cloth. When she reached the gates, a stable boy waved her through with a grin. The ranch looked alive in ways she'd never imagined. Women carrying dishes to long tables, children running through the yard, lanterns strung like stars waiting for night. And there he was. Elijah stood near the barn, sleeves rolled up, laughter in his eyes as he helped lift barrels of cider. He looked different now, lighter somehow, as though the weight he carried had learned how to rest. When he saw Clara, his face softened into something wordless. He wiped his hands and walked toward her, boots stirring the dust. "You came," he said, quiet as a prayer. She smiled. "Told you I'd bring pie. A promise is a promise." He took the basket from her gently, his fingers brushing hers, a touch that said more than words dared to. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The world seemed to slow, holding its breath. Then Ben's voice broke through, bright as a bell. "Miss Clara." He ran across the yard, hair wild, cheeks flushed. He grabbed her hand and tugged. "You got to see the garden Pa planted. He says we're growing sunflowers 'cause they remind him of you." Clara's breath caught, though she laughed softly. "That's so." Elijah smiled faintly. "Seemed right. You brought light back to this place." The day passed warm and sweet. Clara helped the ranch wives set tables, her laughter mingling with theirs. The men gathered round, tipping hats, curious about the woman who'd tamed the rancher's grief. Ben stuck close by her side, proud as a son showing off a secret treasure. When supper came, the yard filled with life. Fiddles playing, lanterns swaying, the scent of roasted meat and apple pie thick in the air. The world glowed that night, not just from the light of the lanterns, but from something deeper, shared kindness, quiet redemption, the small miracle of second chances. Clara sat with Elijah under the wide oak near the porch. The stars blinked awake above them, slow and forgiving. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "I thought money could fix what I'd lost. Turns out, gold don't fill silence the way laughter does." She looked at him, her voice low. "Grief don't disappear, Elijah. It just learns how to sit quieter." He nodded, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "I reckon it does. But you brought peace to my boy, and you reminded me that life don't stop when hearts break. It just waits for someone kind enough to wake it again." Clara felt something stirred deep inside her. Not the fast, reckless feeling she'd once known in her youth, but something slower. Sure, the kind of love that doesn't shout. It whispers. It stays. As the night deepened, music rose. Couples danced in the yard, boots scuffing the earth, laughter rolling like thunder without rain. Clara sat with Ben, teaching him how to clap to the rhythm. Elijah watched them, a soft smile on his lips. But peace in the Wild West never lasted long. The wind shifted, carrying a smell too sharp to mistake, smoke. At first it was faint, then came the shout from one of the ranch hands, running toward the barn. "Fire! The stables are burning." Everything turned to motion. Men grabbed buckets, women screamed for the children. Flames licked up the barn side, orange and furious against the dark. Horses cried inside, trapped. Elijah bolted forward, barking orders, his voice sharp and commanding. Clara's heart pounded as she followed, skirts catching the wind. "Ben," she called, but the boy was already running, toward the sound of the horses. She saw him disappear through the barn doors, swallowed by smoke. "Ben!" Without a thought, Clara ran in after him. The heat slammed into her like a wall, the air thick with ash and fear. She covered her mouth with her sleeve, eyes stinging. Inside, the flames danced wild, cracking and spitting. Ben stood near a stall, trying to untie a terrified mare. Clara reached him, coughing hard. "Go, sweetheart, outside. Now." He shook his head. "She's scared. So am I," she whispered, "but we still gotta move." Together, they pulled the rope loose. The horse bolted through the smoke, nearly knocking them over. Clara grabbed Ben's hand and turned toward the door, but a beam cracked above them, falling in a rush of fire. She shoved him forward, taking the blow across her shoulder, pain ripping through her. Elijah burst in then, face streaked with soot, eyes wild. He saw her, saw Ben safe in her arms, and for a moment, time broke open. He reached them, wrapping an arm around each, pulling them out through the smoke and into the cool night air. The flames roared behind them, but they were safe. Later, when the fire was tamed and the stars returned, Elijah sat beside Clara on the porch steps. Her shoulder was bandaged, her face pale but calm. Ben slept nearby, curled in a blanket. For a long while, they said nothing. Only the crickets filled the quiet. Then Elijah spoke, his voice low and trembling. "You could have died in there." She smiled faintly. "So could your boy." He looked at her, eyes glassy. "I don't deserve that kind of love." "It ain't about deserving," she said softly. "It's about doing what's right when it calls your name." He reached out then, hesitant at first, and took her hand. His was rough and trembling, hers steady and warm. "You saved my son, Clara. You saved me too." Long before that fire, tears gathered in his eyes, reflecting the dying glow of the barn's embers. "All my life, I measured worth by gold and land and cattle. But tonight, watching you walk through fire for a boy that wasn't yours, I saw what real riches look like." She turned to him, their faces close in the lamplight. "Gold beneath the dust," she whispered. "That's what kindness is." He nodded, voice breaking. "Stay. Not because I'm a skin you two, but because this place, this family, is yours now too, if you want it." Clara looked out across the fields, silvered by moonlight. The wind carried the scent of ash and wildflowers, a strange mix of endings and beginnings. She thought of her old farmhouse, small and lonely. Of all the nights she'd prayed for purpose. And she thought of Ben, the boy who had made her laugh again. Of Elijah, the man who had forgotten how to hope until he met her. She smiled, tears in her voice. "Maybe it's time I let the wind carry me somewhere it wants me to be." He squeezed her hand. "Then let it carry you here." Months passed. Spring found the ranch blooming again, fields green and wide, the sky soft as a lullaby. Ben rode Daisy now, chasing butterflies across the pasture. Clara tended the garden, the one full of sunflowers, tall and golden, faces turned toward the light. Elijah worked beside her most days, laughter replacing the silence that used to haunt him. Sometimes, when the sun dipped low, they'd sit together on the porch, Ben asleep in her lap, the horizon painted with color. And Elijah would rest his hand over hers and say, "Funny thing, Clara, I thought I'd lost everything. Turns out I was just looking in the wrong places." She'd smile and whisper, "Love hides in plain sight. You just have to open the door when it knocks." And the wind would sigh across the plains, carrying their laughter to where the world still needed a little hope. The camera of your mind pulls back now. The porch, the sunset, the endless gold of the west fading into evening blue. And you hear the old storyteller's voice, slow, warm, true. Sometimes fortune don't ride in on a stallion covered in gold. Sometimes it walks up dusty steps, knocking gentle, a skin only for a place to rest. And if you open your door, truly open it, you might just find that the richest things in life ain't the ones you can hold. If this story stirred your heart tonight, if you believe kindness still has a place in this wild world, then tip your hat to Clara May, the girl who gave a millionaire back his soul. And tell me, friends, where are you watching from tonight? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West, where hearts are tested, hope rides eternal, and love, somehow, always finds its way home.